We all make choices. Well, welcome in. That was quick. I think we're up and running here. The name of the book is called Choices. You know, if you can find a really good word, I'm going to ask my guest, who is the author of this book, whether the word drives the story or whether the story becomes the word. But I'll tell you, sometimes the title of a book is enough to make you say, huh, I make those. Welcome in. Dan York's State of Mind for the original broadcast date, which is the 13th of December. Nice to have you. You may see this program a couple of times. We are going to forego our usual hit on the issues and run down on what's happening so that we can spend some quality time with our author and spread it out a little bit. So welcome aboard. So here's the headline. That is our focus for this evening. Do we have that correct? No? Well, that's the book. And the headline is... Yes, he left prison, 2007, seems to me. Then there was a lot of chronicling of his story, including this one.
Life's too short to hold grudges.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. Listen, they do what they gotta do. I don't hold grudges against Vinny or anybody. They're doing their job. If I put myself in a position to where I have to worry about the law, that's on me. Choices. I made a choice. My favorite word is choices. It should be everybody's in this world. You make it, you own it. You reap the benefits, suffer the consequences. You made the choice. Be man enough or woman enough to take the pain as well as the gain.
Huh. I don't know, man. We're fascinated by this stuff. Joe Broadmeadow is a former 2-decade police officer in the city of East Providence, former private investigator, a pretty smart guy, and has been doing some writing and has become, it was tapped to bring you this book, the Jerry Tillinghast story, I guess. Choices. You make them, you own them. You heard the essay there with the Crime Town episode, which had everybody fascinated, didn't it? It was just
at one time it was the most popular download in the world.
Right, crazy, huh? Welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Dan.
Once upon a time, somebody came to you and said, "Hey, you interested in writing this book?" We'll talk about our fascination with mob figures and the stories and some specificity about what's in this book and Jerry's story. And Jerry's been making the rounds as well. We may have him on the broadcast down the line in the near future. We'll see how that whole thing rolls out. But you've written 2 other books.
I have.
And so this is not new to you.
No, it's actually...
Collision Course and Silenced Justice.
Silent Justice.
Yeah. Tell me about those.
Those 2 books are more police-oriented. They're fictions. They're not. They're novels, and they're all based in Rhode Island. They're loosely based on incidents that may have happened with East Providence, but they're fictions. They're not true story. You know, they're not actual stories. But I've been writing since I was probably 6 years old. I've always enjoyed writing. When I was on a police department, I would write for newspapers and magazines, but I wrote under a pen name because sometimes police departments don't necessarily understand some writings that you might do. But anyway.
So once you retired, you were able to put your name to your work? Once I retired and I
decided to take it seriously. Actually, it's 3 books that I've written before this. Yeah, the third one is called Change of Hate. That's an entirely different one, more about an attorney. But as luck would have it, Paul DeMeo, who was Jerry's lawyer, and his wife read the book and liked it. And so he's the one that called me and asked me, didn't tell me what it was about. He asked me if I'd be interested in picking up a project that they had started. And so I was telling you earlier, as I pulled up in front of Paul DeMeo's office, there was a car in front of me, and I saw this gentleman getting out of the car, and I said, that looks like Jerry Tillinghast, who I knew, of course, from his reputation. And he walked into Paul DeMeo's office, and I said, oh, it's going to be an interesting story. And that's how it played out.
Meaning?
Well, you know, if you lived in Rhode Island, you know the mob, you know Raymond Patriarca, you know the history of organized crime, you know the fascination that Rhode Islanders have had with organized crime. Not just Rhode Island, but Rhode Island has always had a somewhat love-hate relationship with the mob. You know, the reputation back in the 60s and the 70s was that the mob kept things quiet in Providence, or kept things safe in Federal Hill, I should say, but of course that is a myth. And Jerry was a big part of that, even though Jerry wasn't of the Italian made man genre with organized crime. He was a very significant player in the group. Feared, his name was synonymous with you know, somebody who was tough, violent, allegedly involved in several homicides, one that he was convicted of. So I knew there was a big story there. And once you get talking to Jerry, Jerry is a very interesting guy. You have to remind yourself sometimes of who he really was at one time, although I think he has changed a bit.
Remind yourself why.
Well, I mean, I think that Jerry, and I said this to him, I don't think I would be able to have the same kind of conversations that I had over the last year with Jerry 20 years ago, because he was a different person back then, you know. And he'll tell you, and any police officers that ever had any contact with him, for the most part, will tell you that he never fought with the police, because he was smart enough to know that that wouldn't get him anything. All that does is just create more problems. So he could be funny. He could be gregarious. He could be an entertaining sort of guy when you were putting handcuffs on him and taking him away. My father was with the state police. I knew the name Jerry Tillinghast when I was a kid, because my father, you know, had contact with them. So there's a long history there of you know, Jerry. And once you get talking with them, what struck me about Jerry, one of the things that I said to him right from the beginning was that I'll write the book, but anything that we put in the book, I have to be able to verify. I'm not just going to take your word for it, or, you know, it's going to be something that I want to be able to back up. And in getting into the book, and getting into the Jerry Tillinghast story, and getting into particular into the Basmajian homicide case, there's some really interesting facts in there that are troubling, to say the least.
Well, he denies having committed that murder, correct?
No, he does not. In the book,
he changed his mind.
Well, he didn't change his mind. Essentially,
what happened there? As recently as some of the readings I've done, he was still denying that he had anything to do with it.
Right. And I told
and by the way, we should refer to. I mean, not everybody knows what that last name is for the deceased. He is the individual that was shot to death.
He was shot to death. Exactly.
And Mr. Tillinghast was convicted of such.
He was. He and his brother Harold.
Right. That happened at the airport, did it not?
It happened on Airport Connector.
Right. Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So lay it on me.
Well, the interesting thing about that case was that that particular night, Rhode Island State Police and the FBI had a surveillance on George Basmajian that had nothing to do with. They had no indication that that he was going to be hit that night. But George was a bad guy. He was an active enforcer, loan shark, bookmaker. And so they would periodically follow these guys around because, you know, generally speaking, these guys are, you know, one step away from trouble. And as they followed them for a period of time, and they were in a stolen car, and Jerry was driving, George was in the back seat, and according to the testimony, Harold Tillinghast was in the passenger seat. As they went around the corner on the Airport Connector, they briefly lost sight. The police briefly lost sight of the car. When they get to the red light, the road is a little different now than it was back then.
Yeah.
When they got to the red light, they could no longer see Basmajian. So at first they suspected that he had gotten out of the car somehow. So they backed off a little bit. A car turned down into an industrial area right near the airport. They waited a little while. They went into the area, they find the car, and there's George in the back seat with 9 bullet holes in him. And as Vespia testified, Vinny Vespia was the lieutenant there. They asked if he knew he was dead, if he checked if he was dead, and he said he took a educated guess because he had had much contact with these guys, and generally speaking, they didn't leave live people laying around. But the interesting part about the case was that...
Right, well, that's Jerry and his brother Harold right there.
That is.
Yeah. Harold is no longer with us, correct?
Harold passed away. He was released after 15 years, serving 15 years of the homicide. His health had deteriorated a bit in prison. He died of a heart attack about 4 or 5 years after he got out. Not before he got jammed up again on another matter that also ensnared Jerry, but
Was that the gambling?
That was a gambling ring.
That
Stevie
Jerry
O'Donnell
reportedly was running out of his New Hampshire jail
He
cell?
was running out of, yeah. Jerry
Hey,
would
listen,
tell
I got to
you-
tell you something. We just authorized sports betting here in Rhode Island, reportedly for reasons of that competition.
Mm-hmm.
But, they had to train those people a long time to get that sports book up and ready at Twin River and Tiverton. I don't know how Jerry was pulling that thing off out of a jail cell. That's pretty talented.
They,
right?
he'll tell you that the prisons back then, they were a little different. Those guys, the wise guys, had the run of the places. The guards were intimidated by them, so they could do what they wanted.
Okay.
I mean, Gerard Ouimet, who was the crew that Jerry worked for, he had a phone in his cell because he was, well, the argument for the phone in the cell was that he was the head of the prisoners union. Prisoners had a union back then, national union, and he had the phone in his cell for the union purposes, but you can assume what he was doing it for.
All right, so, why don't we do? We'll pause here. This is fascinating. The book is called Choices, and Joe's written this book about Jerry Tillinghast. When we come back, we'll get to the answer as to whether Jerry admits to it or not, and this fascination with the story, and what it's like to write about a character like this. Stay with us. That is Jerry Tillinghast, the subject of the book called Choices. You make them, you own them, fresh from his lips, and there's a more modern picture of him. Certainly. When was that video taken from? Do you remember? Do you know?
That was
Joe?
when he was first released, which was 2007.
Seven. Joe is the author of the book. It's as told by Jerry Tillinghast. Joe's written his own 3 books, novels, prior to this, and was tapped, as you may have heard in the early segment, by Mr. Tillinghast's lawyer to put this whole thing together. We left him hanging. Last I checked, he denied the hit. You say he doesn't anymore. What did I miss?
Well, he doesn't deny it anymore in the book, and that was part of the arrangement that I made with Jerry, was that I had to be able to back up everything he said, and that it wouldn't do any good to deny things that were, fairly obvious that he had to have been involved.
And he'd already done time for.
He'd already done his
Convicted.
30 years.
It's not like anything he said would be double jeopardy.
No.
Right.
No, that's really
So
the
what did he
point.
specifically admit to?
Well, what he admitted to was he essentially told me the whole background story. It's explained in the book. The whole story was how he did not know the Basmajian was going to be hit. George had been doing some sort of backdoor drug deals.
Again, he's the victim.
Basmajian,
right.
Correct. George Basmajian had been doing some backdoor deals that Gerard Ouimet was not particularly fond of. Ouimet had also borrowed $30,000 from Basmajian, and Basmajian wanted the money back. And so what happened was Gerard Ouimet, Jerry Tillinghast, John Ouimet, and Basmajian had a meeting not Basmajian, Skippy Burns had a meeting at St. Rocco's in Cranston, and they discussed where they were going to rob these bookies. And Gerard told Jerry to get Basmajian to go with him. So the premise was going to be George, Jerry, and Skippy Burns. And as luck would have it, the night they decided to do it, state police are following Basmajian around. There's a number of surveillances, one of which is at St. Michael's, the Michael's Lounge in Providence, which later became the Peppermint Lounge that was infamous for the Dickie Cowley murder, one of the scenes of the murder. And it's all related. Actually,
now listen, you're the author, so it all rolls off your tongue anyway. But as far as I'm concerned, there's too many people in this state who can also tell this story and let it roll off their tongue.
Yeah, exactly.
It's whatever.
That's
But anyway.
exactly the problem. Anyway, in a nutshell, the state police see Basmajian and Jerry leaving Michael's Lounge, getting into a car, driving off. They lose them as they leave there. Later that evening, they find George Basmajian in the back seat, Jerry in the front seat, and who they identified tentatively as Harold, They say they got a glimpse at Harold in the passenger seat pulling out of the back of a bowling alley in Cranston. They follow the car. The shooting takes place. They find the car behind the industrial pod. Basmajian's dead in the back. No one else around. Lieutenant Vespier and Phil Riley from the FBI go to Michael's lounge, find Jerry and Harold there. They arrest Jerry and then they arrest Harold. There are a number of witnesses who testify at the trial that Harold never left. Harold was always there. No one ever was able to explain how Harold. So the difference here now is Jerry now acknowledges that he was in fact driving the car. That Basmajian was shot because he owed Ouimet the money, and that it was Skippy Burns who had actually pulled the trigger. And Burns was one of the bonded vault robbers who had been actually convicted. And believe it or not, he was convicted, sentenced to life in prison, and was out on bail when this happened.
Yeah, you got to read Tim White's book on the vault.
Exactly.
That's great work. In fact, didn't Tim originally work with Glenn Laxton on that book? And wasn't Glenn Laxton one of the early guys to be working on this project?
He was. Glenn was the first one to start the project, then he passed away.
Okay.
And that's how Paul ended up coming to me to.
Gotcha. All right. So Jerry goes away for being what? Convicted of the killing, but really admitting to being an accomplice to it. Is that
well? During the trial,
the new version?
During the trial, he denied everything.
Right.
He said that he wasn't there. He had nothing to do with it. There was if you read the transcripts of the testimony, the expert testimony, there was a lot of conflict in the testimony as to whether or not Jerry actually could have fired the gun as he was driving around the corner on the airport road. The angle of the firearm, the shooting just didn't. It was inconsistent. Let's put it that way. So a lot of the things. One of the things.
And Harold's 15 years were for this, right?
Harold's 15. They were both convicted of first-degree murder.
But is Jerry still holding to the story that Harold was never there?
Yes.
Huh. You think Harold was wrongly convicted?
Yes.
No kidding.
Yes. I don't think it was intentional on the part of the state police. I don't think anybody purposely lied at trial. I think what happened, if you read the trial testimony, they clearly identified Jerry down to describing the clothing, describing what he's wearing as he's driving in this stolen car. They clearly described George Basmajian, who's in the back seat, down to his clothing, down to everything he was wearing in that car. They can somewhat describe the passenger as having dark clothing. I think they took an educated guess. And I think they actually, you have to put this in context of when this took place in 1978. Now, if you had had this conversation with me 10 years ago and said that the FBI purposely allowed informants to commit crimes and they were aware of it, I would have said that wouldn't happen.
But it did in the day.
But it did happen.
In the day.
And
it was different. Everything was different.
Everything was different then. And one of the things that was clear about that time, and Lieutenant Vespier said it on the Crime Town podcast, was that they considered it a crusade. It was us versus them. And winning was the important thing. I mean, Lieutenant Vespier is Chief Vespier is an honorable guy. I don't think they lied. I think they got it wrong.
Gotcha. Fascinating. A few other notes on the book Choices that Joe wrote with Jerry when we come back. The book is Choices. Joe Broadmeadow has written this with Jerry Tillinghast. I was self-talking while I was listening to you chronicle that whole why Tillinghast may not have, why Jerry may have been involved with the trigger guy and his brother may have gotten. Yeah, inasmuch as that my instinct is to be judgmental about even this stuff being published. Mm-hmm. I find myself listening, the detail, your careful narration of it is fascinating. It's a complex thing.
It's very complex.
It's a complex thing. You have empathy for him.
Do.
Because...
Well, one of the things I think is important to understand are two things that brought.
And I only have a few minutes, so
right,
I don't want to
quick.
race you, but
What happened with Jerry? Jerry served as a Marine in Vietnam, and he was accused of being involved in a rape there. He was convicted of aiding and abetting the rape. Now, without going into all the details of the actual case,
probably in the book.
it is in the book. I managed to track down the JAG officer, the Judge Advocate General. He was a second lieutenant back then in the Marine Corps, who represented Jerry. That guy is now a retired presiding justice of the California Court of Appeals, a very long, distinguished legal career. Told me he remembered 3 cases in his career, and one of which was Jerry's. And he said Jerry got screwed. Never should have been convicted, never should have been never been charged. He was charged because of the 12 Marines involved. He wouldn't give him a statement. And that all stemmed from where he came from.
The loyalty thing, right?
The loyalty thing. He would not give him a statement.
Not a
he
rat.
did a year, not a rat. He did a...
So you think that event
He got out of,
affected and informed his life?
He came back. He went to Portsmouth Naval Prison, did a year, got a worse sentence. He got a more severe sentence than the 2 Marines that committed the rape. When he get out, he's got a bad conduct discharge from the Marine Corps. He's got a chip on his shoulder, and he starts hanging around a place called the Bronx Tap. Was Gerard Ouimet's place. And the rest is history.
Why do we like to read books like this?
You know, I'd love to be able to figure it out.
Did you struggle with writing it?
I did, because, and I think Jerry does a good job of explaining in the book that the whole idea of organized crime is a myth. His son actually said it best. His son Jerry, his kids lived with this, and they were all young kids when he went to prison. You know, that this is not The Sopranos, this is not Goodfellas, this is they're treacherous, disloyal, sinister, unkind people. But they have this myth about them. There's this myth that, the organized crime there was some honor among men. There's no honor among men. The honor is, there's honor among men as long as you're making money. The minute you stop making money, you're a liability. And
give me 20 seconds as to why people will enjoy or should read this book.
Well, because I think it's important that people understand how people like Jerry come to be. And the ramifications for society when we take someone like Jerry, a young man, and you stick him in prison for whatever he did in the first time, and he comes out with very limited opportunities. And now what does he do? He gets embraced by the government. Prison is prison is finishing school for criminals if they don't have any other choice. What this book shows is that there's a very sinister underbelly to organized crime, and they're not to be respected. This is going to. I can already see.
So you don't come out, and we're out of time. But you don't come out with a fondness for the mob. You come out with you're a cop.
Yeah, these guys were bad guys. The guys were bad guys.
Oh, fascinating. Thank you for coming.
Well, thank you.
Congratulations on the book, and
thank you very much.
It'll be a read. It's called Choices. Which camera? Make the choice. Happy holidays.
Thank you.
Thanks. Final word when we come back.